Hey everyone, I'm Mike with Mill Market. And today I want to talk to you about how Mill Market helps tree services like yours take their logs and turn them into cash. All we ask you to do is stack your logs at your yard as they come in after each job, just like you normally would. And then once you got enough to fill a tractor trailer, usually that's about 50 logs, just prepare those logs to specification so that they can easily be used by a lumber mill. Once you've done that, we'll send a truck to you so you don't have to worry about the logistics. You load the logs on the truck goes to the mill, and you get paid as those logs are sawn into lumber. Each truckload of logs that you ship to a mill can be worth anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000. And the way you make the higher end of the payouts, you put more time and effort into preparing those logs to the best they can be. We're going to spend some time now and get into a lot more detail about each step of the preparation process and all the different things you have to watch out for. Stay tuned. Hey everyone, this is Mike with Mill Market. I'm here with John. We're standing right here in front of a beautifully prepared log pile, which is really what we want to see from you before you ship your first load. You know, when you send that picture of a log pile, we want it to look just like this. The logs are neatly stacked on top of each other. They sit nicely. What that tells us is that all the logs are straight. You know, there's none that are excessively curved or crooked, and all the nubs have been trimmed flush. So there's nothing that's causing a log to stick out at a weird angle. There's not really gaps between the logs. Everything is just sitting very prettily. What that's going to enable when a truck comes to come get your logs is that you'll be able to easily reach each log and load it onto the truck one at a time, or if there's a loader there doing it for you, same thing. They'll be able to reach each log, putting it onto the truck one at a time quickly, and that lets the trucker just get in and out of there and get on his way easily, which is exactly what we want. Anything to add here, John?
The only other thing that I would add is to be able to stack the logs in such a manner with the ends lined up will allow you to gauge the length of the logs, and we know that they're all about the same size. That's the only other thing that I would point out.
Yeah, no, and it is a good point about the ends, you know, being flush with each other. When we're inspecting that picture of your first set of logs, we're going to look at those ends and say, hey, is there anything here that's rotted? Is there anything here that's stained? We can see very clearly when all the logs are the same plane, whether that's the case or not. And we can even count them and make sure that there are enough logs on your property to fill a full truck. If you send us this picture, everything looks good, we'll send a truck your way. You're going to get paid for that first load. Propped up here on our bunks, we've got a log that unfortunately is not salvageable. There's not really anything we could do to this log to make it ready to send to a mill. What do you see when you look at this log, John?
Well, Mike, right behind you, you can see where the leader's coming off and the degree of bend or sweep that is on that end of the log. And even if we were to cut the log right after that, our 8'6" minimum would actually put us back here. So we still can't even get a salvageable log out of it because of the defects that you see, the degree of bend or sweep, as I said, and there's another defect in a leader coming off of here. Obviously, there's not much to do with this, and as we can discuss as well, is the actual diameter or caliber of the log is going to be too small.
Yeah, that's right. Most of our mills are really not interested in a log that's smaller than 12-inch diameter on the small end of the log. You know, that's really the minimum size that they can get good utilization out of. With softwoods, they can use a smaller log, but this of course is a hardwood, so there's really not much we can do with something smaller than 12 inch, and this looks like it might not even be 10. So unfortunately, this is a log destined for your junk pile or your firewood pile. So what we've got here is a fairly common defect you're going to run across in your logs. This is a rot hole. You know, it's a pocket in the side of the log that can potentially run super deep into the log and totally spoil the interior. John measured this with a tape measure. It goes about a foot deep of just clear rot, which means that the true rot actually runs deeper than that and can even have other effects. Right, John?
Yeah, so what this does is, since it's a kind of a defect in the exterior of the tree, it allows water infiltration to go in, and obviously gravity doing what it does, it'll carry that defect and stain or perhaps rot the entire inside of the tree from this point down. Who knows how far that goes? I mean, you would have to cut into it, but it really is fairly significant, especially something of that size.
Yeah, absolutely. If you see a big rot hole in the side of your log like this, that is not a log you want to be shipping to a mill. It's just going to have all sorts of problems. If you can remove the rot and cut still an 8'6" piece, hey, you know, you're good to go. But when you just see this right dead center in the middle of the log, it's junk. This log here, freshly cut, freshly dropped, it hasn't been prepared at all yet, and the first thing you're going to notice is it's got all of these branch stubs all over it. The most important thing for a high production sawmill is that a log can easily be handled and rolled without running into issues, and a bump like this, those are going to prevent the log from rolling. They're going to prevent it from going easily through a mill's debarker. First thing we're going to do when prepping logs is we're just going to cut those knots flush. Take it away. We're gonna take a look at this log and see how we could prepare it to ship to a sawmill. John, what's the first thing you see when you look at this log?
We got a couple of things that we're looking at, and first and foremost, we want to minimize the amount of work or effort that the sawmill has to put into this. So the more prep that we can do on the front end to minimize the work that they have to do is exactly what they're looking for. What you'll see on the end where Mike is standing is that we've got a double leader that comes off. That's the one obvious defect that we have. We got a little bit of a sweep here on the end of the log, and we've got two leaders that come off here, which are going to be, they're going to ding you on the grade, so to speak, for the quality of the log that's going to come out of this particular butt log.
Makes sense. So you would probably cut this maybe right here or so to eliminate this double leader.
Correct.
And where would you make a cut on that end?
So we'll pull a tape from that end cut there and maximize the yield that we can get in 2-foot increments. It'll be 8/6, 10/6, 12/6. Mike's got the smart end.
So we're at 8/6, about right here.
So if you look where that's going to land, that's actually going to do very, very well. It'll get rid of the defects that are down on this end of the log. It'll get rid of the double leader there. The only thing that it's going to leave is this little leader and imperfection that's popping out of the log here that you can see.
But otherwise, we're gonna have a 3-side clear log, you know, maybe a 13-inch, 14-inch on the small end. You know, this should get a pretty good grade. Before we get cutting this log, just want to talk a little bit about, you know, setting up to prep a log. If what you got is a skid steer, if that's the only equipment available to you, sometimes the simplest thing is just to pick that log up, hold it up in the air like this, and then when you cut those ends off, they'll just drop right to the ground.
We'll just go ahead and cut this log.
All right, now that we've cut this log, you know, before we were looking at what I would say is a pretty ugly log, John, but now, I mean, this is beautiful. You'd be probably pretty happy if this showed up on your doorstep as a mill.
This is great. It'll actually roll, and that's exactly what we're looking for.
So now that we've cut into this log and we've removed that forked end, there's a couple interesting things we can see. For one, we got that double heart we were talking about. You know, so because it had a forked end, there's 2 hearts in the wood. That's okay. It will, at many mills, lower the log's grade, but they will still happily take it and they can make good quality boards out of most of the log. Another thing I want to look at though is the sapwood ring, this outer ring of the log. So, you know, sometimes a log looks great on the outside and you cut into it and you find some issues. And in this case, we got what you would call punky sapwood, which is just basically the wood has started to rot and degrade from the log sitting for too long, or perhaps it was cut from a standing dead tree where this rotting was already happening while the tree was standing and alive. You can see these sort of black barrier lines that are coming from the fungus that are rotting the log. You can also just see the material looks frassy, pulpy, compared to what, you know, nice sound wood looks like. So a log like this is not actually something we would want to ship to a mill, just because that material is not really going to be usable for that sawmill. I mean, no one wants to go to the lumber store and buy a rotten board. Anything you'd add here, John?
Just to point out, again, as Mike said, a lot of these defects you can't see when the log is standing, and you won't actually see them until you get into it when you can make the cut.
You definitely want to pay attention to log storage times. Typically here at Mill Market, we don't purchase logs that have been sitting on the ground for more than 3 months, and that's exactly why. You get rot issues, you get stain issues, especially in the summertime. So it's just something to pay attention to. You know, if you've got a pile of logs sitting in your yard, try to move it within those first 3 months, or, you know, mills might not be willing to accept it. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about what we think here at Mill Market is the best way to prepare logs to be set up. And that is to lay out some bunk logs, which you can see right behind John here. Just a couple of logs on the ground, and then lay the logs you want to prepare across those bunk logs. Depending how long your bunk logs are, you can do 5, 6, 7, 8 logs lined up all at one time. Here we've got 2. The reason we like to set them up this way is because it lets you see all 4 sides of the log really clearly. You can make the determination about where the defects are, and it lets you see the sweep, the crookedness of the log really clearly, and it lets you cut the log and have the pieces just drop to the ground. So John, you know, we're looking at a couple of big oak logs here. What do you see?
So for the one that's next to you, we can see that all of these leaders that have come off have been trimmed nice and flush with the log, which is what we want to see as well. More importantly for this one is we can increase the value of the log simply by cutting it shorter, probably by a factor of at least 2.
Really? So how can that be that a shorter log is worth more?
So all of these defects that we see here pretty clearly, you will get what I call dinged for when it comes to grading the log. If we were to cut this log shorter and have an all 4-sided clear log at 16 foot 6 inches, you have just increased the value of the log quite a bit, because the sawmill doesn't have to contend with the defects that we see. It'll be a nice 4-sided clear high grade log.
Got it. So that's going to pay out a lot better for the supplier here.
Correct.
Makes sense. So when you say 4-sided clear,
yeah, I can go over
explain
that.
log sides for us.
Sure. you want to do, in just as a visual representation, is divide the log into 4 sides, and we'll number them 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can see the quadrants 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you take this line, imaginary line, and carry it all the way down the log, and you look, you'll see that on this end, you can see in this quadrant, you've got one defect and another defect there. So this side is not clear. We can go down here and look at the bottom, and I don't see any bumps on this side. There's no sweep, there's no leaders coming off. This side is clear. If I do the same thing with this one, I've got a leader that you can't see on camera. This side is not clear, and this has the leaders that come off here, so this side is not clear. For this example, we've got a one-sided clear log. Does that make sense?
It does. So John, we've got a one-sided clear log here. That's going to be less valuable to the mill than a log with more clear sides. Why is that?
So when the sawmill, when they're cutting this, if they were to mill it as it sits, they would have to contend with the leaders that come off, which are visual defects in the material that they're producing. It also has another detriment to it, is that the wood where the leaders are growing out of the tree, it makes the wood that's inside more reactionary, meaning there's more stress in that lumber.
Gotcha, so that's going to cause issues during milling.
Correct, and drying as well. So we can alleviate a lot of this simply, as I said before, by cutting the log back to the 16'6" section, and we'll do that, and then we'll show you that we will have an all 4-sided clear log, which therefore will make the value of the log much, much higher.
Awesome. And you say 16'6". Generally speaking, at mill market, that's the maximum length our mills will accept, with some exception, but typically the mills do not want logs longer than 16'6". The shortest log is an 8'6" log. Usually you want to cut in 2-foot denomination. So you've got your 8'6", your 10'6", your 12'6", your 14'6", and your 16'6". The main exception to that is 9'6". Most mills are happy to take. You know, when you're looking at a log, you want to make the best piece possible that's in one of those length denominations. Let's see if we can make a 16'6" log that eliminates all these defects, all these branches. We have a 16'6" piece right here, which, as we can see, is eliminating all of these defects, all of these knots, all these leaders that John was talking about are now going to be off this log. Let's go ahead and cut this baby. Now that we've cut the end off this log and removed those knots, we've drawn the quadrants here again. And John, what do you see now?
So if you look at down the side of the log, you can see 1, 2, 3, and 4. The number 1 quadrant is completely clear of knots or defects that we can visualize. Quadrant 2 is the same, quadrant 3 and 4, all of them are clear. So this is considered a 4-sided clear log at 16'6" in length. That is a high value, high grade, high quality mill log.
Yeah, any mill's gonna be really happy to see this log show up at their doorstep. They're gonna give it, you know, usually their highest grade. You're gonna get that top dollar payout for this piece. So we've got our logs laid here on bunks. Bunks being the less important logs that you lay on the ground to put the logs you really want to prepare for milling on top. And now, before we prepare these logs, now that they're laid up on the bunks and you can really see everything about them, we're gonna just walk around the log and see what we can find. We're gonna check if it's curved, check for defects. We'll start with this face. When I'm looking at this face, I'm checking for staining, particularly staining from metal. That's gonna be like a blackish blue, but also other types of stain. I don't see anything. This is nice and clear, so that's awesome. We're gonna move on to this side of the log now, and immediately we can see defect right here, huge knot. That's gonna degrade the quality of the lumber that comes out of this. Another huge knot right here up top. Gonna keep walking through. Looking at the rest of this side of the log, I don't see any other problems. When we get back here, the butt end, the bottom of the log, we have a bit of butt flare. That's where this sort of bumpy end of the log comes off the profile of the trunk. We have a saying we like to say, real logs roll. A log that's ready to go for a mill can easily be rolled. Anything that's gonna be in the way of being rolled needs to be fixed. This flared out end needs to be cut in profile with the rest of the log. Let's move on to the back side of the log now. We can see on this end, we've got more of these flares that do need to be cut back in profile. Looking at the face, you know, we don't really see any issues here. We do have some superficial cracks. That's okay. That's not going to cause any problems for the milling process. So this is a nice log end, just like that end. Now let's move on and inspect this final side here. Standing here in the middle of the bunks, I don't see any issues on this side of the log. I'm going to check as well on the underside, make sure there's no knots, no seams, cracks, anything hidden under here. The advantage of the bunks, but I don't see anything. This is a great log other than those 2 defects in that butt flare, which we're going to take care of. All right, so John and I are going to prepare this log for milling, so we need to make sure that this butt flare, this flared back end of the log, is cut back. So John's going to make some horizontal cuts here, and we'll end up with a nice, neat cylinder. Take it away, John. All right, now that we've cut the flare off this log, it's gonna roll much, much easier. It's gonna go right into the mill's debarker without issue. And it also presents really, really nice. I mean, when this log rolls off the truck, the scaler at the mill who's evaluating your load is gonna know that you knew what you were doing when you put this load of logs together. That just means they're gonna be in a good mood when they're grading and evaluating the rest of your wood. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about log storage tips. I'm here with Tim, and these are really important things to consider during the hot summer months when logs are liable to spoil. If you've got a log that you're expecting to be sitting for more than 2 or 3 weeks before you ship it to the mill, it's worth taking these things into consideration to make sure the logs maintain their value. So the first thing is, just like we like to prep logs on bunks, we also like to store them on bunks. That improves airflow, prevents moisture buildup around the log, keeps fungi and other rot-causing agents away. Another thing we like to do is wax the ends of the logs with a clear end wax. It's important to do this really shortly after the log comes down. That's the best time to do it. You really lock the moisture levels of the log in. You prevent it from drying out and splitting. You also prevent moisture from building up further, which again invites fungi and other things that will stain or rot the log. It's also important that this end wax is clear, because mills really do want to see the end of the log and inspect it when it comes in while they grade it. If you sent something with like a green end wax where they really couldn't see the log end, they'd be pretty unhappy. They'd have to cut it back and inspect the surface. So use a clear end wax and just take a few minutes here like Tim's doing to paint the wax on the ends of your logs, and you're good to go. You can store them for months.